Hey everyone, I'm Cappy and you're watching Beyond the Plate, but just a taste. If you'd like to hear this podcast episode in its entirety, you can do so on all major podcast platforms. As for me, I'm a chef by trade and hospitality professional. These days, I head up Rachel Ray's culinary operations and co-founded her cooking and kids charity called Yummo. 5 years ago, I had the idea to put together a podcast where we sit down with the world's culinary elite and explore their journey into the food industry and the social impact they have made in their community, how they give back, hence the name Beyond the Plate. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. If you listened before, we're so glad you're back. We're bringing you a little taste of our full audio episodes here and hope it inspires you to cook or, like the chefs we feature, make a difference in your community. Reminder, the entire conversation is on our podcast Beyond the Plate. On to this week's episode. We reached out to Danny Meyer and he said, why don't you ask Will about how he weighed and grappled with his decision to become the general manager of 11 Madison Park in the first place? He had a very different career path in mind at the time, and it took a lot of selling and convincing.
Oh man.
I love that you're I love that you're managing some of some of the coolest places or hottest restaurants in New York, and you wanted to run Shake Shack, if I remember that correctly. What the hell were you thinking?
So okay. I never wanted to be in fine dining. I had a complete aversion to the idea of fine dining because the restaurant business changed from when I was 12 to when I was 25. Restaurants for a long time were about like what was happening in the dining room. You went there to see and be seen, to be taken care of, to feel a connection to the maitre d' and the people around you. And then, and by the way, this isn't a bad thing. Generally, it just didn't feel right for me. It became, with the advent of the celebrity chef and all of this stuff, it became so much about the chef and so little about the hospitality that I had an aversion to it. I believe that hospitality is taking what you do seriously without taking yourself too seriously. I believe that you can only be your most fully realized self at the table if you have fun at work, and the stuffiness of those places made me allergic to them. It didn't feel like you could ever have fun working there or dining there, and therefore I wanted nothing to do with them. And Shake Shack felt like, wait a minute, hold on, this is the most casual thing, but done with precision and a focus on excellence and filled with integrity. And it's Danny Meyer and it's casual and there's no chef at all. And it can just be like this beautiful expression of giving people something delicious and helping to brighten their day. That, for me, felt amazing. And then Danny came and offered, and by the way, the reason I was in charge of the cafes at MoMA was because when I met with him after I'd been at Restaurant Associates for a couple of years, I said, I'm ready to be a general manager. I want nothing to do with fine dining. Do you have anything for me? And he had the cafes at MoMA. And so it was a perfect match. Then he came and said, what about 11 Madison Park? And I was like, what was the sales pitch here? I was like, dude, I don't want, you're trying to make this into the most fine dining place. But I called my dad, as I always do, told him what had happened. And he said, hey, listen, do you want to grow with that company? And I did. And he said, when they need you to be there for them, you should be, if you ever expect them to be there for you. And I understood why Danny was offering me the job. It was the restaurant that was pushing so hard towards excellence. And he was concerned that if it pushed too hard towards excellence without pushing just as hard towards hospitality, it wouldn't feel like a Danny Meyer restaurant anymore. And so I was almost the counterweight. And so the deal we made was that I'd go to 11 Madison for 1 year, and at the end of that year, I'd get to go work at Shake Shack. Which now sounds hilarious, right? I'll do it. I'll go to 11 Madison for a year as long as I get to work at Shake Shack.
During the first year as GM of EMP, did you ever question that decision?
I'm sure there must have been moments when I did. It was not easy at all. it was a lot of, anytime you're turning something around, and that's what that was, right? 11 Madison Park was one type of restaurant. It was being turned in a very different direction to become a different one, with different groups of people within the restaurant that had competing interests and desires. And it was effectively like oil and vinegar culturally, with like the fine dining crew that came in with Daniel and the people that had been at the restaurant for years, because they were just a completely different set of priorities and core values. But so yeah, well, I'm sure there were a few days where I went home and I was like, man, this is this is ridiculous. In general, no. I very, very quickly, I never liked fine dining because I had never had the authority to change how it could feel until I was there. I was running the show. And suddenly I was like quickly realizing that fine dining is what that experience at the Four Seasons was. It's this moment. It's an opportunity to create a magical world in a world that needs more magic. And now I had the authority to do it in a different way. It wasn't as much about like showing off. It wasn't as much about, look what we can do. It wasn't about making the people walking into the restaurant feel lucky that they were there. It was just about creating a freaking cool restaurant where we were really good at what we did and we could have a lot of fun with the people we were serving. And the moment I realized that fine dining didn't have to be the thing I perceived it to be was the moment I realized that there was nothing else I wanted to do.
Okay, so that's so we have a lot of young listeners of the podcast, people going into college, in college, etc., and beyond. But I guess the question is, you're an optimistic person, I feel. How do you handle challenges in your career in general?
So my dad has a lot of things that he's said that I quote frequently. Perhaps the one I quote the most frequently is, adversity is a terrible thing to waste. Challenges or adversity are inevitable. They will come, like, sure as the fact that the sun will rise in the morning. You will face challenges and adversity for the rest of your life. You can't control that. What you can do is decide how you react to it. And I'm not like such a sunny optimist that I like to encourage people to just brush off challenges. I think it's essential when something shitty happens that you give yourself the grace and the space to feel bad about it, to feel the weight of the disappointment, or even to feel bad for yourself. I don't think that's a bad thing. In fact, I think it's essential to process whatever grief comes from the challenge and then put it behind you and realize what you can either learn from the situation, how you can use it to make you stronger, whether that's through like learning something from it, or honestly allowing the challenge to like kind of make you angry so you push even harder, right? It can be education, it can be motivation. So how do I respond to challenges? I feel bad for myself for a minute, and then I use it to propel me further.
Okay, so after 5 years at EMP in 2011, you and your business partner at the time, Chef Daniel Hum, purchase 11 Madison Park from Union Square Hospitality Group at Danny Meyer. Take us back to the day when you met with Danny. Like, how does that conversation go? Because I remember like reading about it and I was like, holy shit, who does that? Like, this is, you know what I mean? I knew you were onto something, but I'm curious.
It wasn't my idea. We had been approached to do the restaurant at the Nomad. I loved 11 Madison Park. I knew, this is 2011, we weren't anywhere close to realizing the potential there of what we were building. So I wanted to be a part of 11 Madison Park for a very, very, very long time, but I also didn't want to be an employee for the rest of my life. And we were given this opportunity at Nomad to be owners there. And so the conversation with Danny started with me saying, hey, I got an idea. We're going to start our own company where we own the Nomad separate from Union Square Hospitality Group, but we still run 11 Madison Park as a part of your team. How do you feel about that? And he's like, no. And of course, it's Danny. So like, he was completely right. He normally is. That would never have worked. But I asked him the question. He said, let me think about it. About a week or two later, we met again. That's when he said no. But what he said right afterwards is, how about instead you buy 11 Madison Park? He recognized, I think, that we were the right people to run it. And it was going in a really, really good direction. And he also recognized that when you have in your gut a desire to be an entrepreneur, like, there was nothing that anyone could have done at that point to get us to abandon that ambition. And so us not doing Nomad and just being employees at 11 Madison, that would have had a short shelf life anyway.
What do you wish you would have known before purchasing 11 Madison Park?
I am actually grateful for how little I knew. And let me explain that. I think too often people over-research everything that is entailed with doing the thing that they want to pursue. Yeah. Well, and by the way, because when you over-research it, when you over-analyze it, you can psych yourself out of doing it. Sometimes you just need to go with your gut. By the way, he said that, what if you guys buy the restaurant? And before 2 seconds had passed, I said, we'd love to.
Wow.
I didn't even check in with Daniel. I was like, yes, we would love to. I had no idea what was entailed. I had no idea how to set up a company. I had no idea how to raise money, ROIs, accounting, HR, any of it. And if I had spent too much time thinking about all the things I was going to need to figure out, I might have said something differently. The restaurant business is hard. There's so much about it that is really, really challenging. There's no reason to sugarcoat that, right? Whether it's lawsuits and labor and competition and landlords and everything.
Yeah.
But the reason that I wanted to own restaurants will always be the thing that is most present in my relationship to restaurants generally. I love, love, love restaurants. I love managing a team. I love creating these little fantasy worlds, and I love serving people. And that's the only thing I needed to know then. Because had I known more, it wouldn't have changed anything. It would have just psyched me out a little bit more. And so, I'm grateful that I had the education I did, so I was able to navigate through that journey pretty effectively. But sometimes ignorance genuinely is something I can recommend.
Thanks for watching and listening to Beyond the Plate. We hope you enjoyed a little taste of this episode. If you'd like to hear this podcast episode in its entirety, you can do so on all major podcast platforms. I'm Cappy, and remember, there are never too many cooks in the kitchen.